Our speaker this evening is Dr. Harry Willnus. Dr. Willnus, perhaps known as Dr. Harry, is a retired teacher having taught in the Romulus School District for 36 years. He has had an intense interest in the UFO or flying saucer field since he was about 10 years old. He saw an old Detroit Times article, I think. He is now one of the senior American citizens in the UFO field who continues with a marked interest in the phenomenon. Over the years, Harry has investigated many UFO cases, most in the Detroit metro area. He was the first Michigan person selected by Dr. Alan Hynek in 1973 to work with Hynek's nearly formed UFO group named the Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS. CUFOS, okay. You may recall that Dr. Hynek worked with the U.S. Air Force as a scientific consultant for Project Blue Book. That was in the days when the Air Force used to investigate UFO reports, which they no longer do. Dr. Harry has appeared on the Discovery Channel in several episodes of Season 2 Close Encounters. He was the lead expert for the episode on the 1966 Michigan UFO event nicknamed the Swamp Gas case. Harry has had several recent radio interviews with NPR, Michigan Public Radio, concerning UFO events in southeast Michigan and has been the subject of a number of newspaper and magazine articles. Here's some of them.
Come on in, guys.
Concerning UFO, I already said that, okay, magazine related to the UFO phenomenon. He continues to read widely on the UFO topic and attends the one best yearly UFO symposium in the world, namely the International UFO Congress. This isn't on there, but he is a legend. So we're very fortunate to have someone who's this legendary in the field. Please welcome Dr. Harry Willnus.
Thank you, Dale. Good job. Good job. Hey, Dale, why don't you take the truth sign and put it in back, and you can take a look if you want to just pass it up gently. People may want to just scan it and be sure it's here at the end of the program because there's some pretty interesting quotes on there. Okay, yes, I am Harry. I've been in the UFO scene for many, many, many years. Been interested in these guys. No, you got it. That's fine. Let's find out what kind of a crowd we got here tonight. So I want you to put yourself in one of these places. I'm going to ask if we're going to ask about your belief in flying saucers, UFOs. If you're neutral, you're going to be in the middle. You're going to say to yourself, you know, I'm not sure if there's something there. I've heard a lot of stories. Maybe there isn't, maybe there isn't. If you went a little bit this way, you're pretty sure that there's nothing to the UFO thing. You know, I hear stories, but I'm just not sure. And if you were all the way on this side, I'm going to put you in places in the room, you would say there's absolutely nothing to this UFO stuff. It's crazy. It's just made up. If you went to this side of neutral, you would say to yourself, I'm pretty sure there's something there. I've heard stories. Maybe I know somebody. Maybe I've seen something. Or if you went to the very end, you're very sure that there's some kind of thing going on with this flying saucer stuff. I'm not sure if that's clear. So I'm going to ask you to raise hands. You don't have to if you don't want to. If I put you in the middle, if this was this thing spread out, and we put you guys in the middle who are neutral, I'm not sure. I've heard stories, blah, blah, blah. I got to find out more about it. How many would say I'm kind of in the neutral area, right in the middle? Would you count two quickly for me, hands?
One.
How many you got?
I think 14.
14. I guess I should have this up here. That'll do it. Let's go to this next way over, which would be this way a little bit. You're pretty sure that there's nothing to this UFO thing. I've heard stories, but I really can't be sure. How many would vote there? Good. And finally, let's go to this side, the other side. We're moving over here. You're pretty sure that there is something there. I can't be 100%, but I'm sure there's something to this UFO stuff. Can you count again, please?
Looks like 15. 15 or 16.
Finally, we're going to the very end. If we went to this far side of the room over here, and I said, take a chair, you're very sure that there's nothing to the UFO thing. It's made up. It's a bunch of hogwash. Come on. What's wrong with you people? Get it up there. So we have one. Okay. Opposite. You're absolutely, I may have messed that up. I'm trying to get the scale go. On the opposite side, you're absolutely sure that there is something to the UFO thing. It's there. It's here all the time. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. We got somebody in each particular group. All right. Very good. So yes, I've been into the UFO thing for over 60 years now. Old guys like me are dying out. We've lost one of our real recent aficionados, which is, oh, here, you're not going to be able to pull this one up. Stanton Friedman. How many know of him? Stanton Friedman, just about any UFO program, he usually appears on there somewhere, and I've treasured this guy for years. He was one of the first scientists, nuclear physicists, who would say this: yes, there are UFOs. They're real. They're out there. Not everything's a UFO. I mean, not everything is coming from another planet or what have you, but they're out there. And I really respected that. And he said, let me also add this. He said something that stuck with me my whole life. This made so much sense. If they, whoever they are out there, are only 0.5%, 0.5% more evolved than we are, they've been around a little longer. Think about this. They would be thousands and thousands of years ahead of us. Does that make sense? 0.5%. Look what we've done. If you went back to 1900, 120 years ago, and told people that we would have crafts that fly around the earth with people in them, and they can do it in 90 minutes, what would people say to you? You're out of it. Cell phones, television, it's moving so quickly. So thank you, Stan. All right, let's see here. Let me get my thoughts here. Let's talk very quickly. I'm going to go into the size of the universe. Let's pretend that this room is the galaxy called, which we happen to be in, called the Milky Way. So if this was it, how many stars would there be in this thing, this particular room?
Billions.
Billions and billions of them. We don't know for sure. How big is this galaxy that we live in, this huge cluster of stars?
100,000 light years across.
Again?
100,000 light years.
You need 100,000 light years in a craft to stop here, and let's go down to the bottom, traveling at the speed of light, which is
186,000
miles per second. It's huge. Billions of stars. When we look out beyond our Milky Way, what do we see? Other galaxies. There's zillions of them. We didn't know that, but till we got the good telescopes and stuff. There's zillions of them out there. Now you heard this one. There are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on every beach in the world. Think about that a second. Grains of sand. There are more stars out there than grains of sand on every beach in the world. I go to Negril, Jamaica every year for a month, usually February. Be sure to plow my driveway. And I'm amazed. That's a small beach. It's called 7 Mile Beach. That's a small beach in the world. Think of some of these that go for miles and miles. I think about that all the time. More stars and grains of sand. How could that possibly be? And again, if there is something out there that's a little bit more evolved than we are, they've been around a little longer, they would be thousands of years ahead of us, quite possibly. When you think about it that way, and I do oftentimes, to me, I'm 100%, by the way, where does Harry fall on this? I'm very sure. I would stake my life on it. I'm 100% convinced that we are not alone. UFOs, flying saucers, whatever they are here. They're here on a daily basis. How often? The one that I've heard the most recently is about every 3 minutes, somewhere in the world, something is seen that people can't quite identify. Every 3 minutes. We only hear, every so often, we don't hear about this very often, it hits the press that there's been some kind of a UFO sighting or something. Now, recently, there's been some really interesting stuff going on with UFOs. I got this off Fox News. I don't know how many of you have seen it. This is less than 10 days old. This really surprised me. So here we go. Can we go ahead and play this?
Absolutely.
Do we need the lights off?
We can flip the switch. We'll leave the dimmers on, but
Navy pilots are claiming they've spotted UFOs nearly every day for 2 years. Wow, at first, the pilots reportedly thought these objects were part of a top-secret drone program, but a near collision in 2014 changed their minds. Now, next guest is sounding off in a brand new series on History Channel called Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation. Here with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon. Christopher, do you believe the UFOs exist?
We know that UFOs exist. This is no longer an issue. The Navy itself has publicly acknowledged the fact that they exist, and Navy pilots, active duty pilots, have gone on the record in the New York Times acknowledging the fact that they exist. So the issue now is, why are they here, where are they coming from, and what is the technology behind these devices that we're observing?
Are there indications that these unidentified flying objects are doing things that
See if you can put that on my belt.
There are indications, actually. There, the Nimitz incident, a famous example of this, which was well known.
He had this right here.
Radars, multiple pilots in broad daylight. That vehicle demonstrated speeds in excess of 5,000 miles an hour. It was able to hover 50 feet above the ocean after descending from above 80,000 feet. So the pilots who are observing these craft are absolutely mystified, and that comes through clearly in their public statements.
They are frustrated. They feel as though something should be done.
They're deeply frustrated, and that is the core of our show, Unidentified. We're giving military personnel on the front lines a voice. We're helping them get out the message, what it is they're encountering and why they're so concerned about it.
And we're not the only country who's having these encounters.
Absolutely not. And in fact, as our investigation unfolds over the first 6 episodes this season, we're going to be presenting information from a NATO ally that's been having very similar experiences.
All right, I want you to brought a clip with you. I saw that you carried the tape in with you when you in the green room. So here it is.
The object the Navy pilot is tracking suddenly seems to get bigger. The object then appears to accelerate rapidly, disappearing off screen.
That's a significant rate of acceleration in a horizontal plane off to the left. That's very fast. I have no idea what that thing is, and it's not acting like a aircraft. It's not acting like anything I've ever seen.
So that's been the story. The New York Times writes about it. You have a strong reputation and a big title and a huge resume. You're saying is actually happening. Has there been interaction being to being, human being to whatever these beings are?
Not that I'm aware of. These are interactions between intelligently controlled vehicles that are highly sophisticated, that are operating in and around U.S. military facilities. And hence the concern. The pilot's concern are, one, there have been near mid-air collisions. There's a safety issue. But two, there's a vital national security issue, which is that our sovereignty is being violated by vehicles of unknown origin.
What's more responsible? Announcing it and saying this is our problem, this is the video, or not announcing it?
Let me mention in that regard that when Lou Elizondo, my colleague, was still in the Pentagon running the UFO investigation, I worked with him, introduced him to 2 individuals who are direct reports to General Mattis. We were unable to get that on the Secretary's agenda. Ultimately, Lou concluded, and I concluded, that the only way to make progress on this issue was from the outside, to take the information to the public and the Congress. That's what this show is about, and that's what these military pilots are helping us with.
So we're going to see it coming up Friday, May 31st at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock Central on the History Channel. It's called Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation. Christopher Mellon, fascinating stuff.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great to see you.
Greatly appreciate it.
And that program on the History Channel now is on weekly. I'm not sure, there have been 3 or 4 episodes so far. Friday nights, History Channel. It is repeated at later times, at different times and in following days. So if you're interested in this stuff, don't be afraid to tune that in. Why doesn't the government want to come up with with the truth, which is that we're being visited. Anybody?
They say hysteria has a lot to do with it.
Hysteria.
Yeah, it's scaring people.
You're absolutely right.
Orson Welles.
Orson Welles. In it was about 1960, the Air Force commissioned a study from the Brookings Institute. I don't remember what it cost them, but it was a degree of money. And the question was, what would happen if there were aliens and they came down here? And the result?
People would.
There would be panic. There would be panic. You'd say, oh, come on. When a superior civilization comes in contact with an inferior civilization, usually the inferior civilization gets eaten alive, meaning they lose their selfness. Examples, Aztecs and the Indians. Great civilization, here they come, and they decimated Aztecs. And who are the other ones? Aztecs, the Incas, correct.
Yes, Mayans.
So the Mayans, the government, the people who are in control of this information are getting to the point where they know it's got to come out. It cannot be covered up that much longer. And we're slowly moving to that particular realization. It's not going to be a quick one and done where the president comes on and says, yep, we're being visited. It's probably going to come about slowly. This kind of stuff that you just saw really helps. Here we've got government officials. We've got people who know what they're talking about. That was some of the most sophisticated radar in the world where you saw those jets. This thing came from, what did they say, 50 or 80,000 feet? It dropped in 2 seconds from that right down to the surface of the water. The water was roiling. The ocean was roiling. This was off the coast of San Diego, and that was in 2004. And then we've had more recently off the East Coast, 15 and 16 maybe, where there's another carrier group out there. We have Navy out there performing their maneuvers and what have you. And this stuff is very common now. So, any quick questions on that part of it?
I have a question. Is water a factor, like when these things come down? Is that?
Well, they go into the water. And that shocked some of my friends. What? They go? Yes. And these things that dropped out of the sky hit the water, and they said they were going 80 knots underneath the water. We don't have submarines that can go that fast. And then they can come out of the water. Puerto Rico's got a great case on that too, where it shows the object going into the ocean, coming out of the ocean.
Well, I was just going to go into that with you as far as the question goes, because I've watched a lot of these programs on various
Right,
subjects
ancient aliens and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. They say that there are stations way down at the bottom of the ocean where they actually have, like clusters of cities or whatever, where they're down there and they just shoot up out of the water and then take off nonstop.
You're right, and yes, there are bases.
Right.
This book is by Preston Dennett, Dennett. It's called Undersea UFO Base. I've just been corresponding with him recently, and he signed his recent book. But if you read this, tremendous amount of UFOs going into and out of the water off the coast of California, around Santa Barbara. No, what's the island out there? Catalina. A lot of UFO sightings out there. I've often thought in my old age, I might want to go just sit out there for a while and watch. But no, I don't need to do that, because I know there's something out there. All right, where else are we here? Help me, where are we coming from right now?
You're talking about panic?
Oh, panic and other reasons why they don't want this thing to be released, but it's got to be soon, because the evidence, it's so obvious to me. If you study this, it's so obvious that we are being visited. We are not alone in the universe. Yes, sir?
One of the main reasons why the government doesn't want us to know about them is because when they do come here, they're going to reveal everything that our government has been doing to
It may be, yeah.
A lot of people still don't know that.
Yes, go ahead.
Question, you said the study that they did was done in like the 1960s?
It was around 1960. It was the Brookings Institute.
Okay, now with all of the movies and the news reports and Ancient Alien, all these TV shows and things like that, people have changed attitudes a lot in the last 50, 60 years. So shouldn't they just do another study to see if the people would be acceptable to the idea now? I mean, you're always going to have a few stupid people who are going to freak out no matter what.
Right.
But I would think the majority of the population now believes that something is going on.
Are you talking about the world or just the U.S.? The world? In other countries, they probably don't get as much information like we do. They're just not aware of it. And this is really surprising me, this stuff that's coming out. Plus, we got the U.S. history program now, unidentified, which is every week now. And there are other things there, too. I'm trying to think what else there's been recently that's caused me to... All right, let's deal quickly with a few of my interesting cases over the years. The Hatcher case, the park rangers. This happened in '78, February the 28th of 1978. I was teaching school then in Romulus, and the way I got wind of this is a kid came in the room between second and third hour between classes. Boy, Mr. Willnus, you ought to hear the story I heard down at Bar Hops this weekend. That's the local hangout where you go get a burger and talk to the kids. And it was a park ranger. His name was Carl Hatcher. Very poor pictures. I borrowed a camera from the photography department, snapped a few pictures, and he was in a squad car. You can't even see his face. Anyway, and he actually, I love this. You can't see this very well, but this is Carl and his partner, Luther McLaughlin. He was closing the park ranger in the Metro Park there. I think it's in Belleville. It's right on the Belleville-Romulus border. He was closing the park, and what he did around 10:30 at night, he'd start through, and if he sees cars, he'd use the speaker. Park is closing, time to leave. As he closed the Hannon Road gate, he was going back to his squad car. He looked way over towards the pool and saw a light in the sky, and he thought, why, that's unusual, what is that? But he didn't pay much attention to it. Got in his squad car and began to drive towards the pool area where he saw this light. And then he saw it again. And he thought, that's a little unusual. If it's a plane, it wouldn't still be there. What happened next was, as he approached this area by the pool, he said this object was still there, and he was so awestruck by this, he came closer and closer, and his squad car slowed to a crawl. Next thing, he put it right into a snowbank, and there, dead ahead of him, was this object hanging there. He described it as a sombrero-shaped object, and I know I got a picture here somewhere. Sombrero-shaped object that, here it is, Carl Hatcher, February the 8th, 1978, at 10:45 p.m. Looked like a sombrero. He imagined this thing was 25 to 35 feet across, oscillating lights around the perimeter, which you often heard these colors, light blue, yellow, light green, orange, and white. You still hear the same kind of colors today. Had a hump, again in the middle, with 3 rods, he said, that stuck out on the top, on each side, like a blinking red light at the top of these rods. He has a partner. Now there's a second ranger. What they do is they start to close the park, and there's always a second ranger coming behind 6, 8, 10 minutes in case they run into somebody who wants to cause trouble. And he wanted to call his partner, Luther McLaughlin. And he picked up the mic, and instead he called his home base by mistake, which was in Flat Rock. Said, Luther, I'm here by the pool, get here quick. And they were confused in Flat Rock. 2574, are you okay? He realized he had the wrong people. He threw the mic down, grabbed the other one, and said, Luther, get here quick, I'm by the pool. And then Luther was on his way. While he's waiting for Luther, he throws open the squad car door, gets the spotlight, and puts the spotlight on this object covering. He thought it was about 150 yards away, about a football field and a half. Luther finally arrives, and as Luther comes running up, Luther saw it too. This object finally took off. He said, and when it went up and left, this is according to Carl Hatcher, this thing kind of went up and it went this way. He thought an airplane, now that's pretty close to Metro Airport, he thought a plane was kind of coming in, and he thought this thing kind of took an evasive move to avoid the plane, interestingly enough. Now, perhaps what's even more interesting, by the way, this is Carl's. All right, let's do another case quickly. Let's move on to the Mark Avery sighting. This also happened in 78, very, very close to this, February the 10th, 1978. How many have heard about this sighting before? Good, probably you heard me talk about it 6 years ago.
Where was it?
It was right over I-275. I wrote an article which was by the way, this was Mark Avery in those days. He was the morning man on WJR radio, and he was well known. The only person who was more well known than him, does anybody remember J.P. McCarthy? And in the tape you're going to hear here, J.P. McCarthy is actually mentioned. Anyway, Mark was driving down 275 on his way to Detroit Metro Airport, had his wife in the car, and he was going to Metro to catch a flight to Florida for a 10-day golfing vacation. And this is what happened to him. Out of the sky, along I-275 came, hello. Out of the sky came two very bright lights, like landing lights on an airplane. It was right in the median. He's driving south, and he hadn't quite reached 94. He was on 275, which was newly opened at that time. And one light was lower than the other, and he, oh my God, what's going on? And he began to slow down, and this thing, whatever the lights, kept coming and coming and coming, and suddenly, this thing, he said it never banked. It suddenly came, and the next thing, it's over his car. And he stops his car on the freeway. He said other cars did the same thing. Some cars continued driving underneath, but this thing hung there above his car. He says it was possibly 50 seconds. The way he described this was, he said if you slide forward in your seat and look out the top of your window, what he was looking at was like he was looking into a plexiglass airplane or something. He said this thing was large, like a jet, and the way he described it is if you had the basement, or like this room, and you came and lay on your back, and your whole ceiling was covered in plexiglass. And there were a lot of lights up in there, but some lights were on and some lights were off. That's what he appeared to be looking at. And he said this thing hung there for a time, and then it went west, directly west towards Willow Run Airport, which comes in. Don't let me forget that story with the guy in the tower at radar. Anyway, that really affected him, and that was on a Friday night. How in the world did I ever, you're going to hear this tape. Let's just go ahead and play the tape. I think I got it here. And what did I do with my... Yeah, thank you. I think if I hold this up, this may work.
I can plug it into the speaker, that's why I left
The way I got this was, I also was on the freeway that night. I was coming home from a basketball workout, and this happened, probably this was around
I'll let you start it.
7:45 or whatever. And I was driving home, and after a full day of school, played a little hoop after school, and all of a sudden these calls started coming in on WJR AM radio. The kids used to laugh. You listen to AM? Thank you. People were seeing lights in the sky, and I got so excited. I immediately, I'm on 275, I'm looking for an exit. Here comes the Ford Road exit. Newly opened, come off, take a left, go underneath on Ford Road, and guess what was there? A phone booth. If I didn't have 20 cents, I never would have got this, because the next thing that came on, I called home. I was so lucky that somebody was home. I was so lucky I had 20 cents. Home answers, listen, something's going on. Try to get the tape recorder out of the front closet and record WJR AM radio. And I get back in the car and start driving, and the next thing that happens is this call comes in. This is a first in UFO history. I don't think anyone else has ever had this experience. What you have is a high-powered, well-known radio personality who has a UFO sighting right above his car on the freeway. And then this object continues on towards Willow Run Airport, he thinks. And then he gets to the airport, and on his mind, calls back in live on the air to the evening DJ. I got his picture up here, Warren Pierce. You all know Warren, he's still around. By the way, Mark has passed. Did you know that? Mark passed some years ago. But this is the guy who's you're also going to hear his voice. This again is Warren Pierce, who is still around, and you still hear him on WJR occasionally. So Warren calls in live on the air, and I got most of that call. So I guess, where are we at here? You know which button to press? Let's try this. This may be...
A well-known radio personality in the Detroit, Michigan area. The individual's name was Mark Avery, and he was the morning man on WJR AM radio. He was traveling to Detroit Metro Airport to catch a flight to Florida. He had his wife with him in the car. The time was 7:55 p.m. As he traveled down the I-275 freeway, approaching I-94, two lights came out of the sky and appeared to be traveling along the median of the freeway. Avery's thought was that this object was a plane and was in distress and was apparently going to try to land on the freeway. Avery pulled over to the side of the freeway and watched. As the object approached, it seemed to continue towards him and then stop dead in the air above his car. At this point, he slid forward in his seat so he could look through the top of the windshield. And what he saw was an object quite large that he described as having something like a plexiglass bottom. There were lights on inside. He said it appeared some lights were on and some lights were off. There was no noise. His car continued to run. No problem with the radio. As he watched this object hover for a period of 30, 40, or 50 seconds, as he describes, the object then went west, he said, west directly towards another nearby airport called Willow Run Airport. Avery got to Detroit Metro Airport and then called in live on the air to the evening radio personality, a gentleman named Warren Pierce. You're about to hear the recording, which I managed to get most of on that night, February the 10th, 1978. This is Mark Avery calling in live on the air to describe the encounter he had with a UFO on the freeway.
30, 40, 50 seconds, and then it went off the west, directly west. Now not a banking turn or anything. It went directly west.
Well, I appreciate the report, and we'll file it with the proper authorities if there are any.
Just put me down with the rest of the troops, will you?
No, don't do that, because you know what they say, we are not alone.
It finally happened to me.
Yeah.
The other day I felt very cheated when what was the professor's name on with Joe?
Right. Hynek, Alan Hynek.
Yeah, I said when Dr. Hynek was on, I said, you know, I feel cheated because I've never seen anything that I couldn't identify. But whatever it was tonight, does anybody else mention looking up at a lot of lights?
Well, the last lady said there were a lot of lights. Some were blinking on and off.
I had that sensation, I'm not really sure. They seemed to me, I would describe it more as looking through, almost like looking through windows that lights on the inside or something. You know what I'm talking about?
Like inside a bus or a passenger vehicle where the lights are through a window.
That's right. And looking at it like bulbs through a window was the experience I had. They weren't, the two lights coming at us were extremely bright, like landing lights on a plane. And that's supposed my first impression. I thought it was a plane trying to land on the freeway. But the lights underneath, after the landing lights, the glare of them was gone, and we looked directly up from the belly of the thing, into the belly of the craft, whatever it was. It seemed to me that there were at least 7 or 8 lights, and it seemed as if they were in an interior. It was like looking into the belly of a plane, like a plexiglass airplane or something.
We're checking with the police, and maybe they'll have some more reports, more sightings from other folks around that area.
Maybe I'll read about it in the Florida newspapers.
All right, well, enjoy yourself.
I'm off to the golf course. They'll never believe me in Florida, Warren.
All right, thanks for calling.
Okay, Warren.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Mark Avery, on the way to the airport along the 294, the new freeway, the 296, one of the two, and had a sighting there right above the freeway.
275 is what it was. That particular recording is really historic. You probably won't find another one in the world quite like that, where one well-known radio personality has that kind of an encounter, calls back in live on the air, describes it to another DJ, and what happened to him. So Mark goes to Florida. Of course, what I have to do, that intrigued me so much. I wrote him a letter, WJR, when he got back there on his desk or wherever, is a letter from this UFO investigator. I heard your call. I'm very interested in that. And of course, he jumped on that right away. He wanted to find out what was that thing. He says that was not a chopper. He got so angry at times because he actually got on the air and he said, look, many of you probably heard my phone call. If you were on the freeway that night, please call me here at the station. I want to know what that thing was. If you know what it was, please call me for sure. And then what began to happen? The kook calls came in. What do I mean? Well, what were you drinking that night? And what kind of drugs do you use? He said he would go to a party like at Coleman Young. Remember the old Detroit mayor? At the, what was that, the Manugian Mansion? Be all kinds of people. People would come up to him. He said, I'm so damn angry at people. They come up and they tell me, Mark, you saw a chopper. Come on. And he says, damn it, I know what a chopper. This was not a chopper. It was hanging there. All these lights underneath, this plexiglass thing. And this thing went towards Willow Run Airport. So Mark said he got a call from a woman. He got several calls there at the station who said, I know what you saw that night. It's an experimental airplane. It's owned by the University of Michigan. It's housed at Willow Run Airport. And that's probably what you saw that night. Well, he asked me, would you try to check that out? I said, Mark, I'll try. And I made a phone call, got real lucky, and got a hold of the tower chief at Willow Run Airport right away. And he said, you know, that's so interesting because I was off work that night and I was working in my garage and I had the radio on, WJR. And I heard that and I was so intrigued, guess what I did? He drove back to Willow Run, climbed up in the tower and said, guys, what'd you pick up on radar? Anything? Nothing was picked up. They couldn't identify anything. That was very interesting. He did get a call, he said, from 2 gentlemen who were walking in the area five minutes before his sighting, which was 7:55, I think, who were walking in the area of Merriman and Michigan Avenue. And they said, walking in that area, that a huge circular-shaped object came over that intersection at treetop level, moving slowly, and was traveling from east to west. And 5 minutes later, Avery had his sighting. I'm willing to bet money that they're both the same object, you know, whatever it was. The tower chief said he has to know every plane that's housed at that airport. And he was not aware of a University of Michigan plane, especially wouldn't fly it at night, an experimental airplane, not flying around the freeways like that. Now, somebody told me 5 years ago in here, maybe you're still here, that U of M did have an experimental airplane, except he wouldn't fly it at night. Anybody? No? I think that happened some 5 years ago here. Anyway, that's the Mark Avery case. I finally did meet him. We corresponded a lot. We never did figure out what it was he saw. But there were many other reports around that time. Any quick questions on that one at all? The Avery case? All right, do we have time for swamp gas?
You always get time for swamp gas.
Pardon? You have time? You always have time for that?
Yeah.
That's probably the case I'm most proud of, and I got a great article published in UFO magazine. This was published in England, and this, by the way, my article made it, and it happened to be the last article ever published in UFO magazine because the publisher, the editor, died shortly after my article got published. I heard he was a huge man, 450 plus pounds, and had a heart attack and went under. Anyway, this was their publication, UFO Magazine, published in the UK, and my article was called Swamp Gas Revisited. This was such an intriguing time. This was March of 1966. How many are old enough to remember that time? We got a few people. Tell me that this was a big story at that time.
No?
It was. Well, you couldn't say. Huge story. Covered all the time. Lots of press. Lots of newspaper coverage. The reason that this caught my eye was I saw this picture in a previous thing. There's a man standing talking. The man at the desk, it's very hard for you to see this. The man at the desk was Washtenaw County Sheriff Doug Harvey. And the man standing over him was
Dr. Hynek.
Alan Hynek. What do you know about Hynek?
We just recently rented the Project Blue book. They have the series they just made. It just came out.
What was Blue Book?
Didn't the government hired...
The government used to investigate, the Air Force used to investigate UFO sightings. They did for some 20 years or so. 1969, they wanted out. Can you imagine why they wanted out, the Air Force? We don't want to have to deal with this stuff. You get a case like swamp gas, and it wasn't swamp gas. UFOs all over the place. They wanted out. By the way, UFOs, unidentified flying objects, we now call them UAPs. Anybody? Unidentified aerial phenomenon. Why? Well, UFO, unidentified flying object. Well, what'd you see? Well, it was a light. Well, was it an object? Well, it was a light. So we're trying to change it. This isn't catching on. I still call them UFOs, flying saucers. I was the MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, which is still there. And by the way, this is a great source. I'm not suggesting that I favor any of these. I really don't care. Mutual UFO Network, you want updates on sightings? Good website. QFOS is the one that Hynek started in '73. Hynek retired. Project Blue Book closed in 1968, I think, 69. And Hynek finally formed QFOS, the Center for UFO Studies. And this is the one that I wrote him a letter, and I eventually was an investigator with QFOS. The one that's present is ATTIP. This is the CIA involved with UFOs, and ATIP stands for, I'm not going to pick this up, I should have written it down. Anybody? It'll come back to me. Anyway, the gentleman who, and you're going to see him, Lou Elizondo, who used to head ATIP for the CIA, has now retired, and he's working with several people in Vegas, and they're on this UFO thing. You're going to hear more and more about it. It's called Stairway to the Stars, I think. They've got a few really key people, including this Chris Mellon that you saw earlier. He's actually part of that. Okay, so we're back to swamp gas. So this raised so much of a ruckus around here, the Air Force finally said, Hynek, why don't you go up to Michigan and see what's going on up there, okay? So Alan Hynek came into town, and he went out to Frank Manor's farm. That happened on February of, help me with the date again. I don't. Anyway, he went, I'm beginning to draw a blank here. Working hard. Swamp Gas Revisited. Hynek went out to the Manor Farm. I interviewed the sheriff, Doug Harvey, who's seated at the table. I showed that poor picture. Hynek was driven by Sheriff Harvey out to the Frank Manor Farm and spent the day out there. Driving back to Ann Arbor, Hynek mentioned, and this was so key to me, he mentioned to Sheriff Harvey, he said, you know, I don't know what people saw and what was out there that night. The farmer, Frank Manor, the dogs were barking. It was after dark, and he went out to quiet them down, and as he turned to go back, he saw this, he thought it was a falling star, a shooting star, meteorite. And as it came across the sky and he watched it, it kept coming closer, and then it stopped dead in the air. And this thing came down very slowly. And he went and got his son, Ronald Manor, and he told the wife, call the sheriff, and by the time the night was over, there were 5 or 6 Washtenaw County squad cars there, 2 officers in each car, plus 3 detectives, plus the, what's the nearby town there? Dexter, plus the Dexter Police Department. It was a mess. The next night came Hillsdale. How many have heard about the Hillsdale sighting? Here you had a group of co-eds in a dorm after dark, and one looks out the window, there's kind of a swampy area back there. What's that light? And they begin to watch this thing, and at times this light just comes right towards them and comes right up to the dorm windows, then goes on back. They called the police a couple times. Police would come out, lights, object wouldn't be there. Police would leave, object would come back. The civil defense director for Hillsdale was there that night in the girls' dorm. Hynek came out anyway, and he interviewed a few of the girls there. End result, they told Hynek, hold a press conference. The newspapers were all over this. People were scared, by the way. There was actual fear. True story. I was teaching school at that time. They called an emergency staff meeting. And before the meeting could even get started after school, gym teachers stood up and said, listen, I live a long way from home. I've got a long drive. You better get this damn thing over with quick. I don't want to be on the road if it's even close to dark with this UFO stuff going on. There was fear. So Hynek was ordered to have a press conference. He didn't know what was going on. And what did he come up with in the end? Swamp gas. What is swamp gas? We got an expert here?
Methane.
Methane. It's rotting vegetation at certain weather conditions in the spring, say. You can get bubbles which can kind of pop up. They rarely go more than 2, 3, 4 feet off the ground. They move very slowly. Now and then it'll pop and the light will go out, and maybe one will jump up over there across the swamp. It gives the appearance of movement. And that's what Hynek came up with. Of course, the press was there, and Hynek describes this. You can read all about this. It's well covered in this recent book, the most recent book on Hynek. This was by Mark O'Connell, and the whole book is dedicated to Dr. Hynek. And I was so happy in my life that I got a chance to meet him and got a chance to work with him as an investigator. Anyway, Hynek, that was the worst moment, the worst time in his whole career. He said his head hung low and he got out of the Detroit Metro as soon as he could. He wanted to get out of there. It was humiliating because everybody said, "No way, is that swamp gas?" I mean, there were objects seen in the sky. There was no noise. This is interesting. There was no noise at the Frank Manor house. I'm sorry, there was noise, but at the very next night at the Hillsdale event, the college girls, no noise. What it sounded like at Frank Manor's house was an ambulance siren, is what many of the police said. It just sounded like an ambulance siren. And this thing would be there and move around a little bit, take off and be gone for a while. Next thing, hey, it's back. And this went on for 3 to 4 hours. Same thing the next night at Hillsdale, 3 to 4 hours. Object would come and go. Frank Manor, by the way, is sorry that he ever reported this. That's the tape I wished I could show you, because what happened was he got run over, meaning he said nights there would be cars a quarter of a mile on each side of the road, his dirt road, lined up, and people tromping around the property. One night they heard noises on the roof. He comes out with a shotgun, finds a ladder propped up against the house, and 2 guys on the upstairs roof trying to get in a window. Shotgun, he ran them off real quick. He said he's so sorry that he ever reported that because it turned out to be a real headache for him. Anyway, you can't see this, but the Ann Arbor News saucers are labeled marsh gas. And people laughed about this. Hynek couldn't live that down for a long, long time. And this was the area. It's a very poor picture, but back there, it was in that kind of an area. If you look closely, there's the University of Michigan antenna there, the big, what are those called? The big dish, correct. And they quickly, Life magazine came out with an article on April 1st, 1966. This is only a few days after this happened. The farmer said it wasn't no hullabalootion, said the farmer, and 52 agreed. And again, I got to interview Doug Harvey. We had breakfast one morning up there at the 8 Mile Road restaurant on Pontiac Trail. Interesting character, straight shooter. All right, Blue Book, the Air Force used to investigate. It ended again in the late 60s. Wished I could bring this up. Thought I had it. Questions, quickly. Yes?
I had a sighting. I'm beginning to think my mind might be time warped. I always thought it was in April of '77, but the more I hear, this February of '78 is possible. But I saw something. It had the colors, but I could not get a defined shape. It was like a very dull finish. There was nothing to reflect off of. But it was about 7 o'clock at night, and it was over a field. And
I'm not sure I can read this right now.
There was a beam of light that was shining down into. It would jump around and shine down into the field. And I couldn't stay because my kids were going crazy. I tried to get out of the car to see something, and they were absolutely freaking out.
They didn't want to stay there.
They did not want to see it. But it hovered there, and it wasn't there for long, but then, boom, it was gone. And I immediately got on the phone with my girlfriend, and I said, what is it that hovers about 50 foot over your house and shines a big bright light on you and yada, yada, yada? And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, I don't either, but it was there. And nobody would believe me. And I got home, and I told my husband, and of course I'd lost my mind.
Right.
And the next morning I saw something, and this is my memory. I saw something on the news reporting a mothership that was spotted further over to the east.
Okay.
My question is, have you had experience of people with the spotlighting, like?
They've got wonderful lights, these ships. How do you have a light that shines out of a craft that comes down and stops 3 feet from the ground? What kind of technology is that?
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff goes on. Yes, marvelous lights, very bright, sometimes so bright. I've heard many reports over the years. Again, ask your 10 best friends. Ever had a UFO experience? Probably one's going to say, yeah, I have. People saying, we were in the park, and it was 10:30 at night, and the whole area lit up like bright as day. It was brighter than midday. What can do that? Well, how long it lasts? Well, it was there a couple minutes. Now, that's not a meteorite or anything passing over.
It was like it was a floodlight.
Yeah.
Shining out, but, and the next morning I called the local newspaper, Plymouth Observer, because it was right there on Napier Road.
Right.
Between Territory.
Did they get any other reports?
No.
Probably not.
No, but they did publish it. So
Yeah.
I have my little article. But, yeah, so, everybody, like you say, they make fun of you, but I said, I don't know what it was. It was, as it says, UFO. It was when I did.
You still got that little thing? I'd like to get a copy of that if I could. In the back, yes.
Can I give my sighting?
Sure.
It's 40 years to tell somebody.
Sure.
This is a true story, and there's proof in the Detroit Free Press. In 1977 in March, I'm coming home out of Dearborn up Beach Daly Road. I don't know, you may know where it is.
I know.
Up to Warren Avenue, and I see a light, and I'm like, it starts. It's coming and getting brighter, and then it comes over by my A pillar. That's your pillar there, and the window goes out. So I'm coming up to the red light there, and I was looking up, and all of a sudden this huge red triangular red, like a neon light, was moving parallel to Warren Avenue. I'd say 500 feet, and I mean it was huge. So I'm looking at it, and then I'm running into the curb, and I went up over the curb. And then I came back down, straightened out, and there it was, and it went out just like that. I mean, it didn't dim or anything, it was gone. So I went home and told my wife, she said,
Yeah, that's what usually
I go
happens.
to work the next morning, and I told the fellow next to me, and he said, yeah. Well, I was in engineering, so we had drafting tables. The guy in front of me comes around, he says, did you see something over Warren? I said, yeah, blah, blah. He says, my son was looking, I was looking north, his son was looking south, so we triangle and see the same thing. Now, somebody then comes in with the Morning Detroit Free Press. The two front pages, 1 and 2, are covered with UFO sightings. So, and the ones that were, hundreds of people called in, I'm getting nervous here, and the sightings were over Detroit River then, going from downtown, up the river, over Lake Erie, and up towards Leamington and Point Pelee. Hundreds of people called.
Yes.
So I had the proof, I had the papers for years. I've lost the newspaper. I did extensive research on the internet to try to find this stuff, and I'm a member of MUFON there.
Good.
And it's been hidden. I can't find a thing. But I've seen it with my own eyes, and I'll tell you what, whatever is in there, I don't ever want to meet it. Yeah.
We're talking about some kind of intelligence.
Oh, way beyond us.
They're way beyond us.
Why do we have to be afraid? That's what I say.
Yes.
There's no reason for it. Yeah.
No, they haven't done anything yet, and this is a good point. There's a guy named Stephen Greer who is warning us that be aware of a false flag. What's a false flag, you guys in the military? False flag? They plant something to make it look like this is what happened, but it wasn't. And that what they may be, the government, is to somehow convince us that they're aliens and they're here and we have to do something against them. And I agree with you. Basically, how many different types of aliens are we dealing with? Anybody want to?
I'm not that, but what I was going to ask, I've watched all of these programs like Ancient Aliens. I love that series.
Yes.
They have said on those various programs many times over and over again, about hybrids.
Yes.
Now, if this is in fact a true statement, that there are hybrids walking among us and have been for
Eons.
yeah, eons. You know, they obviously are working, playing, socializing, and so forth, intermingling with us and breeding again.
They're a part of us, yeah.
They're a part of us. So, you know, if this is true, then, you know, we should not be afraid of something that's there because they're part of our cultures and probably throughout all of the cultures.
Yes, they are, and there are many different varieties. Estimates run how many different kinds of aliens? We are not alone. 50, maybe 100 different kinds of aliens. And I've got all kinds of drawings and stuff that where people see them and have experiences with them. What about the abduction phenomenon? Are people being taken aboard?
Do they age? Do they age when
The aliens?
No, the people that are taken aboard these crafts.
Crafts, and then put back?
And then put back.
Do they age? It's a very good question.
Have they aged at all during that time, or did time stop still for them?
I can't answer you on that one.
Lab
It's one I'm not sure what. Pardon?
They're lab rats.
Lab rats?
Yeah.
What?
Just testing them.
Yes, sir.
When you were here last time, you had a woman here that claimed
Nancy.
with you, she claimed she had been abducted.
She's finished her book now.
Oh.
It's called Symbiosis.
That's why I brought my wife to.
Symbiosis.
Listen to her.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
she sounded credible.
she's writing her second book, I think.
What's her name?
Nancy Tremaine. Fowlerville, I believe. Yes, it's much more common than you think. Estimates, maybe 1 out of 50 people. There might be somebody in here. Sometimes you don't remember it. Sometimes you do. Flashbacks. But it's a really unexplained phenomenon. We know very little about it, but it does happen. I'm convinced. Was there another hand back there?
I just want to say, my wife passed away some years ago, and then I started dating, and I dated this woman that claimed she was pregnant twice. And
Without sex.
we didn't get into that. She would get up in the morning and she was no longer pregnant.
Yeah.
And I says, blah, 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 and I says, well, I did a little reading, and sometimes they leave marks on your body, like on the back of your neck or on your legs. And I said, I just read sometimes you have 2 round scars on the front of your bone. Have you heard that?
Well, it could be anywhere in on your body.
There were 2. We looked, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And she was positive of that.
Yeah. Very, very common. That's not an unusual story, what you just told.
It scared me so much that I stopped dating her. She's saying 2 guys in black suits that follow her around.
That's also commonly reported. People who have experiences, sometimes being visited. Government, men in black, MIBs.
Is there any validity to the Valiant Thor stories?
That I'm not sure about. I don't know much about that.
She's had her hand up a couple of
I'm sorry.
when we talked stuff. I was going to ask how you validate an abduction.
What about mom and dad come in the kid's bedroom and he's not there? Middle of the night. He's away with friends and then he's back. There's so many different ways. There's so many different abduction stories out there. I don't know if they're all true or not, but I've met a lot of abductees, including Nancy Tremaine, abducted in 1961, we think, broad daylight in Novi, Michigan. Barney and Betty Hill. You want a good case? You want to read a good book? Read the Barney and Betty Hill case, also 1961, New Hampshire. Abducted in the middle of the night. And what their whole story is and how they ended up going to a shrink. because they were both breaking down, and how this story came out about how they were taken aboard this craft and both given physical exams, including Betty, who was given the pregnancy test, which is now what called amniocentesis. Yeah, she said, "What are you doing?" And they put this thing in her stomach. That wasn't known about in '61, by the way, and they told her it's a pregnancy test. I met, by the way, Betty Hill. They're both dead now, Barney and Betty Hill. But I met Betty. God, it was such a pleasure. What a down-to-earth woman. I've met what's his name there? The lumberjack. Somebody help me. Travis Walton. I've met Travis Walton a number of times. Roswell. Go ahead.
I've been there, but I found out when I went there that the actual crash site
Wasn't there.
No, it was like 40 miles away.
Yeah. But you're in the area.
But I'm in the area,
Yeah.
and I was so surprised because I figured I was going to see alien stuff all over.
No, it's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, it's desert.
It's a
down in
desert. It's the middle of nowhere.
Part of New Mexico.
The theater in downtown
Yeah.
Roswell.
Oh, yeah.
It's cool.
Oh, it's so cool. They said those that spoke of actually being there at the crash site when it took place, and the government was saying weather balloon, read the back of my t-shirt. They actually found bodies, and there was actually a couple of live aliens.
At least one, maybe
Yeah,
more.
At least one or two. And so, do you know, have you talked to anybody? Do they have these bodies somewhere frozen?
I'm sure they do.
Like in Area 51, something like that?
I'm sure they do. Probably Area 51. I think they probably don't use Dayton anymore. Wright-Patterson
Right.
Air Force Base. Yeah, Roswell happened. There were actually two crafts that somehow came together.
Oh, is that what happened?
And one of them, yeah, there was a violent thunderstorm. And by the way, what was around Roswell? Air Force Base.
Right.
That's where our atomic bomb group used to hang out of Roswell, and a lot of radar and stuff. And maybe the radar had something to do with it. But two crafts came down. One of them had dead aliens and maybe one or two live ones.
Right.
All swept up underneath. They had to come up with a story, which has changed. This was 1947, July, and the story's changed several times over the years, and the government still, of course, wants to hush it up. But Roswell happened. Yeah, there was a UFO event there. Was there one more hand? Yes, sir.
I would just wonder how would people respond if they were asked, "Have you ever seen an alien?"
And you mean this group?
In this group or whatever group.
Or anywhere.
Go to any group and ask people, "Have you ever seen an alien?"
Well, I've talked to people that have seen them, of course, but anybody in here? It's going to be a little more difficult to find people, but there are people who regularly see them.
Most people would make jokes about Mexicans.
Kids ask, what do they look like the aliens?
Do they look like these? They look, the regular looking alien is a gray. They're usually quite small, 3, 4, 5 feet tall, large heads, big eyes. Oftentimes when you communicate with them, there's not this talking. How do you communicate with an alien usually? Thought transference. I just knew what it was telling me. And I could talk back, but just think it. And by the way, that's interesting because people talk about getting aboard a spacecraft, and the craft itself seems to be alive. You don't have to pull a lever or something. You think what you want to do, and the craft will do it. And by the way, we're all headed that way. I mean, that's not far in our future at all. Self-driving cars and all that stuff. I mean, we're on a whole new plane here. It's happening so very quickly.
Do we know why they're visiting? Or what they want?
Maybe it's graduate students out on.
Maybe they were here before us.
No, why are we going up there? Why did we go to the moon? You know, why are we going out there? It's just our nature to explore, I guess. Yes, sir.
The first time our astronauts got to the moon and landed on the moon, the very first things that they said,
They were being watched.
no, they said, we're not the first ones here.
Yeah, they were being watched.
Right down, right after they said that.
Right up on the ridge, there were crafts watching our astronauts as they got off. This is not unusual stuff. Listen, we're over time here. I want to thank all of you for coming out. If anybody's into it, we're probably a couple of us going down to the South Lyon Hotel and get something, but you're welcome to join us if you care to. Thank you all for coming out. Keep an eye on the sky.